Thank you. You know, in life, everybody's objective and purpose is basically the same. It's to get all you can out of it and be peaceful and be happy. Right now, I want you to put your mind in neutral, because right now, I want to shock you right now, because my whole message is built around my passion. And after playing 11 years and being rejected 7 times, now you know why I'm here today. We have athletic slavery going on in America today. And it starts at a young age. These are fundamentally imposed characteristics that parents are exploiting their own children, showing them that without athletics, you're going to amount to nothing. After my 11-year career, I've played with players that felt they couldn't do anything but be an athlete because it was taught at such a young age. And the worst kind of athletic enslavement came when Emmitt Smith retired in 2005. He sat there crying right in front of his owner, his master, and he said, "Thank you for this life you have given me." That's what you call slave theology, putting his master right at the hand of God. And what kind of message does that send to the youth? Here's Emmitt Smith. You showed all that strength on the football field. And time you're about to lay it down and stop playing, you start crying. I understand the emotion, but thank you for the life you have given me. A lot of athletes today, they're in a paralyzed state of consciousness. Because today in the NFL and in the Canadian Football League, you got players calling players porch monkey, shine, sambo, and nigger. And players not saying nothing because they're afraid to lose what others have given them and are promising them. That's why I've been on different teams, because I'm a man before anything. If you don't like the way I'm playing, just go ahead and cut me. I chose football. It didn't choose me. You know, there's 2 things that don't lie. That's God and mathematics. Last year alone, you had 1,002,734 football players in high school. That same year, you had 55,000 on all levels in college. 13,000 got scholarships. The NFL was actively scouting 6,000. 340 got invited to the NFL Combine. 320 signed NFL contracts. Less than 3 years of play, roughly 120 players remain. Millions dream, thousands sacrifice for the benefit of a few. Your career is over before it even starts. But these neo-brainiacs have developed the simplest method of control, and that is fear. How did the enslaver show up when he showed up and he colonized Africa? He showed up in a wooden boat with a leather whip. And today he's coming into the ghettos and the slums of America, showing up in a limousine with leather seats, passing out scholarships, saying, "Get your ass on this field and win me a championship." That's what's happening. In order to spark change in anything, you got to speak power with power. If someone's talking about they've already revolutionized black athletes. Only thing we can do is compete. They revolutionized everything else. They took the coaching. They took being agents. You got black coaches right now in the NFL, but right now you got a decline in assistant black coaches. You see? And when they put these figureheads in front, everything looks okay. My whole objective is to see the young athlete get all you can out of sports before it gets all it can out of you. That's my whole objective. But you got these clever speaking agents, these bellwethers, and they go into these ghettos and speak to these young youth, 16 and 17 and 18, living in the ghetto, and you got a naive mama. You know, from a psychological standpoint, the suggestibility is high when you talk about athletic dreams and millions of dollars. And they buy into it because they haven't identified themselves outside the walls of sports. Because when the walls of sports come crumbling down, everything else comes crumbling down. I've seen this with my own eyes. You got players committing suicide, committing crime. What good is an athletic career when after my career I go broke, I get a divorce, kill somebody, or wind up killing myself? It's good for nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because the parents, I hold them accountable today because they are proliferating the problem. Anytime a kid can barely read and write, but yet the glamour of sports is something to pursue, You eliminate everything else. You eliminate education. That will sustain you. Because the development of your mind can take you further than your body. Your body has limitations, but your mind doesn't. I've had parents say, well, Anthony, he's so dumb, he can't go nowhere without sports. But that's your fault. It has nothing to do. That is your fault as a parent if you cannot expose your kids to the other elements of life, like museums and science fairs. Let them pick and choose what they want to be and what they want to become. You know, in sports, this should make you question everything right here. They give individual awards for players participating in a team sport. Does it make sense? You build your body up only to tear it down. My greatest day in sports came off another player's worst day. The fight for freedom is not won inside an arena. It's won outside of it. So now we have a crisis today. We got grown men in high school, college, even in the pros, fighting like slaves on a plantation before the game even starts. This is a moral issue that needs to be addressed today. When in 1946, when the NFL was forced to reintegrate, because from 1933 to 1945, the all-white NFL didn't want any blacks in the industry. They said the black players were slowing down its growth. And then Fritz Pollard developed the Negro Football League. And after World War II, there was a big push for the Negro League to compete with the all-white NFL. So what they did was they took the good players from the Negro League and integrated them into the all-white NFL. And now, since 1946, the black players have taken it to $1 billion plus market, yet we have no owner within the industry. We are the record breakers and the trendsetters, yet we have no voice within the industry. NFL owners are guaranteed profits annually without even a fan going into the stadium, yet players have no guaranteed contracts. This is plantation capitalism going on right now. I mean, you can change the scenery in life, but the situation remains the same. And my biggest fear is this. You got 1,696 NFL players. That's 65% are black. That's roughly 1,100. You got 1.1 million black men in prison. So every time you see a black athlete on Sunday afternoon, he represents 10,000 in prison. And what are the NFL, what are some of these teams doing right now? What are they doing with their used equipment? They're giving it to some of the jails and some of the prison institutions. And right now we're going to see all over again. You're going to see the rise of the Roman Empire, where they put the slave back into the Colosseum, where they don't have to pay them. And the players will not have the opportunity to flaunt their wealth. Only thing you'll be able to do is compete and go back to your cage where you belong, right where they want you. The black athlete, as of right now, is at the zenith of his career. If he doesn't exercise his political and financial influence, he's going to lose it forever. When I look at a leader, when I look at black athletes, when people talk about athletes and they say they're role models, you know, athletes are respected because of their words and their actions. When they say they're going to win a gold medal, they win it. They say they're going to win a championship, and they win it. But our leaders of today in some of these black communities, people stop believing in things that they can't see a manifestation. Our YMCA, better schools. We got 10 schools closing in Seattle, all in the black neighborhoods. You know, and if the athletes would speak out about this, we might get something started. We don't need the athletes' money. We need your influence. We need the black athlete to represent what's valuable in black America and what's good. Because all we see in the media is somebody beating up their wife, a DWI. That's not the representation. No. It takes just a few to make it bad for everybody else. You know? And my whole biggest concern is where sports is going in the future. With the high incarcerate of young black boys being in prison, this justifies bringing sports in the prison institution and coming live from pay-per-view. I can hear the horns. I can see the rise all over again. I hope you can too. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And definitely check out a copy of Anthony's book at the end of the meeting. Our next speaker will be Dave Zirin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Once again, Anthony Pryor, thank you very much, my brother. That was fantastic. Just start by saying that it is hard and it is tough to once again be the worst athlete on a panel here at this conference. And I am by far the worst athlete on this stage. I include Megan in that. But seriously, if you just like forget politics for 1 second and just ponder what you're seeing here. I mean, we have a man who was once the fastest person in the entire NFL, including Deion Sanders. We have one of the finest track and field athletes this country has ever produced. And I got winded this morning picking out this shirt. And which I did follow up though with a nice tasty nap. So don't worry about me. High school though, woo, I was good. You gotta trust me. Okay. No, seriously, it's an honor to be here with these two gentlemen. You know, what binds us, of course, is not athletic greatness. Sorry to shock you. But it is a tradition that sees sports as an arena where we can fight for social change. And I know sports is not exactly the first place that we think about when we're talking about fighting for social change. I mean, it's like expecting to hear about, Mel Gibson having a bar mitzvah, or Paris Hilton getting a job, or John Ashcroft headlining at the Apollo. I mean, these aren't things that immediately spring to mind. And if anyone who, has illusions, like how bad is it really in sports? How stupid does the discussion get? How just soul-scratchingly horrifying is the discourse sometimes in sports? I just want to say take an hour sometime and listen to sports radio. And which is something that, to try to sell some of these books, I do sports radio. I was on sports radio very recently with a guy who goes by the name Johnny Burps. He burps. And we were talking about Barry Bonds, and he said, "You say everyone who hates Barry Bonds is a racist." And I said, "Well, no, I didn't. I said there is a lot of racism surrounding the coverage and discussion of Barry Bonds." He says, "Well, what about the size of his head?" I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He said, in this kind of way, "Look at his head. Have you measured his head? It proves he takes steroids. Have you measured his head?" I said, what am I, like a haberdasher? What do you call it? What the hell do I care how big his head is? Anybody ask Ted Kennedy how big his head is? I mean, that dude's got like a globe on his shoulders. Have you seen Ted Kennedy? And he said, "You're ducking the question. Look at his head. Look at his head." And I said, "Sir, this is the stupidest discussion I've ever had in my life." And he said, "Are you calling me stupid?" Like he's gonna hit me. And I said, "Well, yeah. This might be the stupidest discussion in the history of the English language, because I can't speak for other languages, but yeah." And then it got very ugly. This is terrible. And then it goes to commercial, and he leans over to me and says, "Dude, great radio." My God. And this, for so many, is the politics of sports. And it is just an ugly fact that when sports and politics collide, it can range from tragedy to farce far too much of the time. Of course there is tragedy. The way the NFL worked hand in hand with the Pentagon to exploit the death of Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman, who turned down millions in the NFL to fight in Iraq, only to turn against the war, calling home and telling his family that he thought the war in Iraq was illegal, only to end up dead at the hands of U.S. troops, a fact that was withheld from his family during his nationally televised funeral. His death exploited for cheap PR, and the NFL played ball right along with the Pentagon. That is the most gruesome possible collision of sports and politics. And then there is farce. And when it comes to farce, there is no clown like Yankees owner George Steinbrenner. Now, people may have heard that George Steinbrenner now has police, ushers, and security guards putting up chains along the aisles of the stands to keep people in their seats when God Bless America is played during the seventh inning stretch. And Steinbrenner calls this, quote, a patriotic plan to restrict movement during a time to respect the flag. Now, I really want people to ponder this for a second. Really take a moment. A plan to restrict movement during the seventh inning stretch. Dear God, fans of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but the chains on your bleachers. I mean, I swear, this is terrible, but just between us here, for someone who does what I do, George Steinbrenner is just like the gift that keeps on giving. Almost want to send him a Christmas card. But there's more going on in the athletic industrial complex than just this kind of political garbage, because it's not just pain in politics, but it's also promise. Because you don't hear this on ESPN, you don't see this on your sports page, but for the first time in a generation, you have a layer of current and former athletes standing in the tradition of people like Dr. John Carlos and speaking out against injustice. Now, we're nowhere near the point where you have the Olympic Project for Human Rights turning the sports world upside down. I don't want to overstate where things are, but it's also not 1968 either. And rather than knock what these athletes are not, we need to recognize a process that is beginning to occur. Because make no mistake about it, jocks for justice are back now on the sports landscape. And frankly, if you think about it, why really should this shock us? We have a war in Iraq that's lasted longer than all of World War II. We have the great city of New Orleans dying of neglect. And we have a president who we can say, I think without exaggeration, who's slightly less popular than herpes. I challenge you to ask people, would you rather have Bush in the White House or herpes? And you will, at the very least, I promise you, you will get people to go like this. My God. Let's see. At least Bush will go away someday, but there's this whole other generation. I don't know. Yeah. It's a tough one. And actually, there was one poll people might have seen that Bush's approval rating in the African American community is 4%. You think about this, 2%. My God, that's crazy. Because it's a crazy number because the margin of error on these polls is 5%. Can there be negative support? Someone who passed away but left a note. My God. Now, at some point, this crisis breaks through, even in the gated communities and privilege that surround pro athletes. And athletes are getting up and speaking out in a way that I think is so different than even a couple of short years ago. I've been doing this sports writing thing for about 4 or 5 years, and it's so different now even than it was 5 years ago. A quick list of high-profile athletes who've made statements against the war in Iraq. Steve Nash, our friend Etan Thomas, Martina Navratilova, Josh Howard, Nick Van Exel, Adam Morrison, Adonal Foyle, Joakim Noah, NFL All-Pro Adelius Thomas, and Dr. John's friend, the round mound of sound, Charles Barkley. Now, even in NASCAR, we are seeing this. Now, NASCAR, I know, shocking. NASCAR ain't pretty. No, I know, it's the only sport where you can actually go to the events and buy a Confederate flag thong. This is true. Now, granted, that's a pretty good place for a Confederate flag, but But even in these, you think about that. Even in these, see, this is the only event you're going to go to where you get thong jokes, so that's pretty good. All right. Like Dale Earnhardt Jr., of all people, he told Fox News, they said, hey, so what did you do the other night? And he said, oh, I took the entire pit crew and I treated everybody to Fahrenheit 9/11. And Fox News was like, what? And he said, yeah, that's a movie everybody in this country needs to see. I mean, hell, this is even in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC. And if you don't know what that is, it's like cockfighting with humans. In the UFC, there's a man named Jeff Monson who I interview in the book. He goes by the name The Avenging Anarchist. And on his way to the octagon, where he will proceed to try to stomp the other person's vital organs and joints, into chowder, he hands out anti-war pamphlets to the people in the crowd. He also really abhors violence. I'm not kidding. You got to read the interview. He's like, well, I'm a pacifist at heart. And you're just like, didn't you just break that guy's spleen a second? Now, but it's not just the war. It's former Red Sox player Gabe Kapler has spoken out against violence against women. You have a whole series of NFL players who've been a voice for the displaced people of New Orleans. The WNBA's Cheryl Swoops and the NBA's John Amici have courageously come out of the closet to speak for gay rights. And Amici... And you want to talk about out and proud, folks here from Chicago, June 24th, Chicago Gay Pride Parade, the Grand Marshal, John Amici. Now, what we are seeing is athletes, they're taking this hyper-exalted, brought to you by Nike platform, and they're using it. But there was one moment this past year that displayed it like nothing else, and I'm just going to end on this, and that was Coach C. Vivian Stringer and the women of Rutgers basketball. Damn. Just absolutely smacking down serial bigot Don Imus. I mean, Imus thought it would be all giggles and grins to call the Rutgers women nappy-headed hoes. And he thought wrong. And now he has joined Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Rick Santorum on just the scrap heap of this past year. And, afterwards... the media scratched their heads and they were asking, well, why is Imus out of a job? And I did some shows where people were like, why is Imus out of a job? We don't understand. Why is he out of a job? What did he do that was so terrible? Why is he out of a job? And it's just like, this isn't that hard. It's not that hard to figure out. One, he is a serial bigot, and this was exposed when he said that. I mean, he called African-American journalist Gwen Ifill a cleaning lady. He called New York Times sports writer Bill Rhoden, who's a hero of mine, a quota hire. He told 60 Minutes that he hired his producer because he knows all the good N-word jokes. He called Arabs ragheads. His co-host Sid Rosenberg called Palestinians stinking animals and said we should drop a bomb and kill them all right now. I mean, this man was a bigot, and he is gone because people are sick and tired of this kind of bullshit going out over our airwaves. And that's one reason why he's gone. But he's also gone because this time he did something a little different, and that's he cross-pollinated his bigotry with sports. I mean, remember that Rush Limbaugh got the biggest backlash of his whole miserable, rotten, sclerotic, satanic career when he said that the media overhyped Philadelphia Eagles football star Donovan McNabb because of their quote-unquote social concern to see a successful African-American quarterback. And after thousands of angry calls and emails, Rush Limbaugh was fired from ESPN. But it also immediately, that was great, but it also raised the question, which is what the hell was Rush Limbaugh doing getting hired by ESPN? Now, either OxyContin was getting passed around in a really happy way in the executive offices there, little hillbilly heroin for Rush and the executive gang, or it exposed how right-wing politics are promoted in sports while resistance politics are marginalized. But it's also not hard to understand why Imus and Rush reaped the whirlwind, because we're relentlessly sold this ridiculous idea that our games are safe space from this kind of political swill. We are also sold this idea, and this relates directly to what Anthony was talking about, that sports are somehow this field of dreams, a magic meritocracy where hard work always meets rewards. But when that playing field is showed to be unequal, it stings. When you have a Rutgers team that defied the odds and made the NCAA finals and gets called these horrible words for their trouble, it presses an all too raw nerve. I would argue that nerve is particularly raw for women athletes. Millions of women play sports. Millions of women are part of the sports world, yet they also face the worst kinds of sexist attitudes for daring to do it, the worst kinds of homophobia, and this is especially the case for women basketball players. And this is why so many people, women who play sports, women who know people who play sports, men who might have a relative that plays sports, men who have little 2-year-old daughters and you hope they grow up to play sports, all looked at Don Imus and said, you need to go. Enough is enough. We're not going to put up with this anymore. But at the end of the day, and this I just want to leave you with this, we have to understand that Imus reaped the whirlwind because Coach Stringer and the Rutgers team refused, like so many of his targets, to be silent. That's the number one lesson in this. And on Keith Olbermann's show, she absolutely let loose. And I want to read a little section of what she said. She said, "Too often politicians and religious leaders speak for us, and we sit back and don't realize the power in numbers and when to say enough is enough. We see injustice all the time. A kid that steals something with a plastic cap pistol and spends 10 years in jail, and yet you see the white-collar thieves that steal millions of dollars get off. And I do think that if people stood up, politicians wouldn't wait for a poll, but would be strong enough to make a decision and stand. I've coached for 36 years as a person of conscience, and I would gladly exchange winning a national championship if we would stand and allow the country to somehow be empowered and that we take our country back." Now, it is the last part. It is the last part of that I love so much, where she says, I would gladly exchange winning a national championship. Because it's a great statement. It's like, okay, Imus, you want to cross-pollinate sports with bigotry? Well, I'm going to splice it with justice. And that's absolutely right, because taking our country back, what it means is building spheres of resistance in every aspect of our society, even in the world of sports. That's the example of Anthony Pryor. That is the legacy that continues to this day of Dr. John Carlos. And building that kind of resistance is the best hope, not only for sports, but also for the future of humanity. Thank you very much.